Hey there, welcome to another Path of Exile guide. It is once again that magical time when everyone scrambles to find their perfect league starter only to decide a few minutes before the league starts. Except for you, you're watching this so you'll now know exactly what build you'll start Expedition League with. Now before I dive into the list of builds, let's briefly talk about the elephant in the room, the nerfs. Yes, in the Expedition League, GEG is implementing a series of game-wide changes that will nerf literally every single build in the game. Flask and support gems got nerfed, various forms of damage mitigation got nerfed, and the enemies got buffed. However, most of the builds I recommend in this guide have not been significantly nerfed on top of that. Otherwise put, these skills were not specifically targeted with additional nerfs, apart from the ones that every other build is getting. Some actually got buffed. Now you might ask, but Navandis, if they nerfed control distraction, can't you just replace it with a stronger support and make everything better again? Well, no, not really. Nobody used Control Destruction because it was a fun support, but because it was the best one damage wise. If anything would have been better, we would have already used that alternative instead. So since they didn't sufficiently buff the other bad support gems, the net result is still a game-wide nerf. Of course, Control Distraction is just an example. The exact same thing happened to a long list of support gems like Spell Echo or melee physical damage or brutality. No build will get away untouched unless it was already a shit build because it was using less than optimal support gems. Anyway, long story short, we'll just have to accept the fact that this is the new standard and all the characters will feel less powerful than they felt in the last couple of leagues. There's no amount of smart building that will compensate for this new world order. Now, this being said, choosing a good league starter is more important now than ever before, especially if you're a new player. The difficulty for the story mode has been increased as well, so having a bad starter build could really make the game feel like shit. Finally, if anything's unclear or you have any questions about these builds, you can find me streaming on Twitch at twitch.tv/Navandis, link to the schedule in the pinned comment and video description. I'm usually live 4 or 5 times a week and I'm always happy to help new players better understand this game. Okay, so first up is the fresh out of the oven Viper Strike Pathfinder, which received a series of unexpected buffs and only some minor nerfs, overall coming up much stronger than it was in 3.14. The Pathfinder is also the Ascendancy class which will be the least affected by all the Flask changes, thanks to all the bonuses it has to Flask duration, Flask effect and generating Flask charges. It does look like a poison Pathfinder build is somehow the one combo that can brush off most of the nerfs. So Viper Strike is one of those old school skills that was made for single target, but when using it with melee splash and ancestral call supports, it turns into a screen-wide clearing ability. You get Viper Strike at level 1, and as most other chaos damage skills in the game, it gets most of its damage from gem levels and passives rather than gear. This makes it ideal in a new league scenario as you can save up your currency for upgrades once you get to the Atlas. Even then, there is very little competition for the items you'll need in this build. Almost nobody uses claws and most of the best in slot items are fairly common ones. You can easily kill Awakener 8 Cirrus with 2 Wasp Nest claws as your weapons, and those usually only cost a few chaos orbs. The playstyle is also very simple without any complicated combos or gimmicks. You hit stuff and watch it melt in a glorious green cloud. Anything that survives your initial hits will receive additional poison stacks from each nearby enemy that died. And this form of poison proliferation is perfect for the expedition mechanic, as the fight basically happens in a limited area where waves of monsters are constantly spawning. To summarize, this build seems to tick all the boxes for a perfect league starter. Very cheap and easy to play, not really gear dependent and without mandatory uniques. The main skill is usable from level 1 and after the nerf apocalypse it still came up on top. If this sounds like what you're looking for, then check out the full guide by following the link in the pinned comment and video description. My second suggestion for a league starter is a skeleton Mage Necromancer, which summons an army of ranged skeletons along with a few other minions who are there to support them, most notably zombies and specters. What makes this build an amazing league starter is first and foremost its complete gear independence. Almost none of your minions' damage comes from equipment and you don't need any expensive mandatory uniques which are crucial for the build's performance. As long as your resistances are capped, you're good to go and your skeletons will obliterate everything in their path. Even the best in slot endgame gear costs less than what most builds need to clear white maps. Skeleton mages are obtained by socketing in a Dead Reckoning unique jewel, which transforms melee skellies into mages. While it is a very common and cheap jewel, you might not get it from literally day one of the new league. That's absolutely no problem, however, as in early game and up to mid-tier maps, normal skeletons are just as strong as mages. You'll also find the melee skeletons gem setup in the Path of Building guide for the build. The Skeleton Mage Necro is equally good at clearing large packs of mobs as well as killing bosses or other tough targets. Losing a few skeletons will never cripple you, as raising some more doesn't require corpses. Not only that, but summoner builds are a beginner's best friend. They allow you to observe and learn difficult fights or a new league's mechanic, while your minions do all the heavy lifting. It's much easier to master new or tough boss fights when minions take care of dealing damage and your only concern is proper positioning and staying alive. Third build recommendation is a recently buffed, then nerfed, then somewhat buffed and nerfed again at the same time, Val Ground Sam Chieftain. With extremely satisfying giant hits that almost cover the entire screen, Val Ground Sam is not your average melee skill by any means. In fact, it has better coverage and longer range than many spells. You can take advantage of this and choose when to fight up close and when to slam from afar, depending on the specifics of each combat scenario. On top of that, it's one of the most resilient and tanky builds I've played since the good old days of the Molten Strike Juggernaut. With stun immunity, almost capped physical damage reduction, a really solid chance to block both spells and attacks, excellent life regeneration, this Chieftain build can even be used in hardcore leagues with a few minor tweaks. Gearing is really straightforward and there isn't much competition for the items you'll need in this build. This is ideal in the first few weeks of a new league, as you'll have to squeeze out as much as possible from very little currency. Bonus points: when looking at a new Earthbreaker gem for example, the Chieftain is very likely gonna be a really strong ascendancy this league, so you can easily transition into a new Chieftain build down the road. You can find the link to the full guide in the pinned comment and video description, and clicking on that I think in the upper right corner will take you there as well. Next is one of my most recent builds, the Freezing Pulse Elementalist. Freezing Pulse is yet another very old skill that has seen a constant stream of buffs in the past few leagues, becoming somewhat of a diamond in the rough. Similar to Viper Strike, you get Freezing Pulse at level 1 and the spell has baked in infinite pierce plus a very easy way to obtain extra projectiles, making it really efficient for map clearing without sacrificing any damage. This also means you'll have more than enough DPS for the first 10 or so tiers of the Atlas, even on a 5 link. And speaking of maps, once you have your third Ascendancy passive, the build can run all map modes, so you won't be forced to skip or reroll maps, greatly increasing your farming efficiency. In the full guide, I've added both non-cluster and cluster jewels version for the passive tree, so you can easily start with a cheaper and simpler non-cluster option and then upgrade once you have enough currency or crafted the jewels yourself. While the build is not an outstanding boss killer, it totally makes up for that by being an amazing farmer and a mapping beast. This can even be your workhorse build that will fund other more exotic projects. And as with most of my builds, Freezing Pulse is also extremely easy to play. You just point and shoot and everything is either frozen or chilled to an almost standstill, allowing you to kill everything from a safe distance. Even many bosses will actually freeze when you land the juicy crit, so in general the build sports a pretty safe playstyle, great for new players and beginners. Gearing up is very straightforward as well, with no real mandatory uniques and a high ceiling when it comes to squeezing out every bit of DPS out of this build. The mods you're looking for on your items are also pretty intuitive, and as always the POB contains trade links that will help you shop for the gear. And the final suggestion is yet another summoner, an insanely strong build which dodged pretty much all the nerfs in the past couple of leagues, the Soulrest Phantasm Necromancer. In fact, this might be the first league in the last year in which Necromancer didn't get specifically targeted by nerfs. Now before you grab your pitchforks and torches, I know this build breaks a few of those golden rules of a league starter. It relies on a very specific unique item, the Soulrest stuff, and you'll need to level up with a slightly different minion build, the Skeleton Mage I've mentioned earlier. However, we have the experience of both Ritual and Ultimatum leagues, where a very large number of people started with this build and didn't really have any issues at all. The stuff dropped in price very quickly, and after the first 4 days or so it ended up costing around 5 chaos. And that's a pretty damn good price when you consider you don't need to link it and is the equivalent of a 7 link item. On top of that, the Soulrest stuff is no longer a delve specific item, which means it can drop literally everywhere, in turn meaning much higher supply and lower prices. Once you put the basic components together, the build becomes an insanely efficient farmer and a great boss killer, while at the same time costing as much as a single piece of gear for builds like Carrion Golems. Of course, the build is not meant to be used just as a league starter, but can be taken to endgame where it will crush pretty much all existing content. It can still break the 10 million DPS mark even after all the nerfs, with a good mix of mid-tier and best-in-slot items. There's also a good chance that this build can be morphed into a hybrid using Phantasms and the new minion, the Reaper, so having a Necro in your back pocket might come in handy soon. You can find the extensive build guide for the Phantasm Necromancer linked in the pinned comment and video description.
Learn anything new, Exile?
If you did, then you'll probably be happy to hear there are more videos coming up in the near future with more exciting builds to try. Make sure not to miss them by subscribing to the channel so you get notified when that happens. And while you're at it, why not like this video as well or drop a comment down below to let me know your thoughts. Thank you all for watching and see you next time.